All right, and welcome to our week 4, but adventure 3 hangout. So it's really awesome to be hanging out with you all today, and it's definitely been interesting. We were just having a conversation in the room how this is an interesting experience, and I can say that I'm learning a lot. And I'm going to adjust my picture a little bit. And yeah, so I just want to go ahead and remind everyone of the participation points. So we have the Twitter hashtag LDTIMolo participation point, and I'm actually going to move to showcase or screen share, and we'll go just remind ourselves of where all of those are at. See if I can find the right place. And so let's go and remind ourselves that we have the Twitter search hashtag LDTIMolo, where you can post things with the hashtag LDTIMolo, and I keep track of that. If a question or an idea comes up, you can definitely post there. And in fact, I'll be talking a little bit about maybe how you want to participate in part of our discussion today using Twitter. And then remember that I did have the request to use the chat tool in Canvas, and I'm monitoring that as well. So there's a couple of people in there. And also I keep track of the actual room, our Learning Design and Technology Innovation page. So I take a peek in there and see if I see anything come up. And then finally, you have the option to do Q&A from the broadcast. So you can actually send me a question that will pop up in the broadcast by using the Q&A feature that's in the broadcast tool. So hopefully that all makes sense. We're not using moderator series today. I think I overbuilt the course a little bit and had too many participation points, perhaps. I think that the moderator series would have been more useful if we really had hundreds of people participating, but we don't have that problem. So I'm not using them at this point. And I'll definitely be asking for feedback about the usefulness of the tools that we've been using in our MOLO experience. So kind of keep that in mind over time as to what has been the most useful, the most helpful, the least useful, the least helpful, all of those kinds of things, because that really does help from a learning designer perspective. And that's actually what we're talking about today. So let's go ahead and jump right into our topic for today, and that I've provided the slides for you both in the Canvas course as well as in our little Learning Design Technology Innovation page. So they're in here, and you can follow along if you'd like, or just watch in the broadcast. Remember, you also have the capacity to add comments. So I have shared this document in the way that you can actually participate if you wanted to by adding comments to the slides, and then I can always open up the comments and view them later. I went back and saw some comments from previous slides that I had done, and that's always a very fun and interesting thing. So we are in Adventure 3, Week 4, because remember we extended Adventure 2 for 2 weeks, and so we are in Week 4. We only have basically a week and this week left. So almost 2 weeks. We started yesterday, so about a week and 6 days left with our MOLO time together. And this particular adventure is about kind of upgrading our vocabulary and our understanding about learning design, maybe sometimes called instructional design, and just what that means to you, to me, to us, as we are in these endeavors of engaging and innovative and technology-based learning environments. And that I make as I'm kind of going along is that you have some interest in online or blended, creating online or blended learning environments. So a lot of what I do is really focused in that direction. But I think that what we do with online and blended has a lot of relevance to the face-to-face environment as well. In fact, my dissertation was about the impact of professional development for online teaching and learning on teachers' face-to-face practices, because it actually did have a really big impact on teachers because of the kind of the instructional design perspective, the technology perspective, etc. So hopefully today's concepts help you out, and we'll go ahead and keep on moving. So leveling up, remember our gamification, we don't have an agenda, we are leveling up. And it is leveling up based on our learning design perspective. And so one of the things that I was thinking of is this, because I'm presenting it, right, and I'm sharing, this is very much from my perspective. So as I give my perspective, you want to think about your own perspective. And if it's about your perspective. So when I say something from my perspective, you could create a tweet saying, okay, well, my perspective in learning design is this. And just for fun, if you feel like doing that, that is a way that you could kind of participate today. So I'm going to be giving you my perspective related to, for example, examining ourselves and our educational identities, the science and art of learning, and then learning theory, and then the researcher lens, because I've got a lot of students who are really focusing on a researcher perspective, and I just want to make sure I address that. And then standards, tech trends, tracking the tools, elements of the creative classroom research model, and then a little bit of discussion about learning design and instructional design models. And so all of these things that we'll discuss today, it's kind of like my path leading to being a learning and instructional designer. So I'm really sharing a little bit of myself, and hopefully you'll see yourself along the way as a learning designer or instructional designer as well. And so this is my perspective of the things that you need to keep in mind as you embark on being a potential learning or instructional designer. So when we engage in teaching and learning, some of us go through colleges of education and get some education background in classes and degrees. And as part of that education background, we come to understand a bit about what we call the science and art of learning, and I call them the Gojis, right? Because you learn about pedagogy and andragogy. And so if you're in education, you know that pedagogy, it's kind of a formal definition for it is the structured formal K-12 learning. Pedagogy includes a lot of amazing, great things like constructivism and all kinds of great ideas that it's not necessarily a negative thing to be considered the structured formal K-12 learning, and it's really awesome, and we draw from all of these ideas, but it tends to have this kind of formal connotation to it. And then andragogy is then the structured formal adult learning, right? Because right around 1980, some folks thought, well, you know, pedagogy really means leading the boy, leading the child, and is very child-centered and youth-centered. And so let's think about adult learners and what we might do differently for adult learning. So we have then the pedagogy and andragogy, great gojis, great places to draw from. But one of the places that I've really enjoyed investigating recently is the concept of hudagogy. Again, we don't throw out pedagogy and andragogy, we acknowledge and we bring those with us, but I've sort of moved forward and started talking about designing from a hudagogical perspective. And one of the things that I like about the hudagogical perspective is that it really takes into consideration the fact that we now have the information age, that we now have the internet. We have the world of information at our fingertips. And that is, I think it's a shift in thinking that some of us are definitely exploring and some people are struggling with. And so I come across a lot of folks who struggle with that there might be a change in paradigm in the way that we as instructors view ourselves. We really don't need to be all the time anymore the sage on the stage, the person giving the lectures and doling out information and knowledge and expecting you to sit there and just listen to us like you are right now. But that there is something to be said for having the ability to do your own research, to have your own self-directed learning using metacognition, doing a lot of sharing of your knowledge and creations and creating original works. So learner as creator instead of learner as consumer is a really nice concept here to think about for pedagogy. So again, pedagogy doesn't negate pedagogy or andragogy. It just kind of moves forward a little bit and takes into consideration the world of information technology and the internet. And then another one that I've come across recently as being a member of a curriculum and instruction department that is actually pretty well known for its multicultural education perspective and critical pedagogies is I came across a really great site that had awesome conversations about hybrid pedagogy. And it's for me just an intro into some ideas about how the world of technology and those of us who are really in deep with the technology, how we could maybe start bridging and having conversations with critical pedagogues. And so I really liked what this site had to say about working to cross, just to be more collaborative and speak each other's language perhaps. So those are kind of the areas that I'm looking at as far as the science and art of learning, and that really helped guide me as a learning designer and instructional designer. And so this could be a moment for you to kind of stop and consider, you know, am I K-12 educator? Do I really draw on a lot of pedagogy? Is there room for pedagogy as a pedagogical learning designer? Or am I a teacher of adults, and do I really draw a lot from andragogy? And maybe should I now think about this pedagogical perspective, and does it have a place with me now? And then of course hybrid pedagogy, that's also speaking to a lot of people these days. So, you know, give yourself a moment to kind of think about, maybe post a tweet, maybe write a note to yourself, and think about what are the gojis or the sciences and arts of learning that you draw upon. And take a drink of water while you think about that. It's okay to just even take a note on the side or pull up notes on your computer. It's something that you really need to ponder, because this is part of who you are as a learning designer. And I'll keep on moving forward as you are thinking about these things. So then as we move forward, there are many learning theories out there. Some of these were birthed out of pedagogy and andragogy, and I think we're going to see more birthed from pedagogical and hybrid pedagogical perspectives. But these are the learning theories that I draw from. And you'll note that there's some stuff here in yellow. These are kind of, I added these later and realized I didn't have enough of my online teaching and learning models in here, and so I added a couple, and so I got to go back and add the references, the citations for those. But I tend to draw from concepts like technology-based pedagogy, where definitely technology has a place with me. It's one of the tools in my toolkit, and as I'm teaching and learning, I definitely make sure that I consider what role technology has or should have or maybe shouldn't have. But definitely technology is a tool in my toolkit. And I'm just kind of thinking, as I look at this, you know, technology-based pedagogy, maybe there's room for thinking about technology-based pedagogy. I don't know, sounds kind of cool to me. Social constructivism is has a long time place in my heart. I definitely believe in providing opportunities for folks to work socially and to create their own learning and do a lot of hands-on kinds of things. And where you're at, you learn from there, and you are able to co-create or create with others. And so constructivism, social constructivism, has a big place in my heart. And you can see that from the collaborative activities that I kind of integrate into what I do with you all. And then I really like the idea of transformative learning theory, and I really try to make that transparent to my students. And my students will probably tell you, the ones that are here face to face, that I'm a little crazy. But it's because I really expect us all to go on an adventure and a journey together and not just learn some things, but to truly be transformed from beginning to end. So we're going to do stuff together that's new, that's takes you out of your comfort zone, that really opens your eyes, that makes you think differently. And so I tell my students in a transparent way, I try to anyway, sometimes I forget, but it's in my syllabus. I really want you to take on this experience and be transformed and take that mindset with you of having this transformative opportunity. And so I try and create safe spaces so that that transformation can occur and that you're not afraid of failure. And yeah, it's okay to be struggling and it's okay to be overwhelmed and it's okay to be confused, because believe me, I'm there with you. So a lot of learning happens in those places of confusion and struggle, and we call that kind of the zone of proximal development. I probably should add that here, right? Is the ZPD. Should add that right after transformative ZPD, because basically we are stretching our boundaries and we are kind of stretching our thinking, and it's a really kind of cool concept to think about. And then of course, I really love collaboration and community work, and so I always draw upon learning communities, the community of inquiry, which is a presence model, learning and knowledge building community. I used to just call it learning community. And then one of the things that I witnessed as I was teaching these classes about learning community is the knowledge building that occurs when you have people working and sharing and then creating from those shared ideas. You just have this incredible capacity for knowledge building and new creations. It's pretty cool to watch. And so I need to, like I said, I need to come back and edit these for the citations, but those presence and interaction models are pretty cool within the online teaching and learning theories. And then I was writing an article with some colleagues and came across critical media and community cultural wealth, and I'm working to integrate that into my own kind of learning theory schema, and just making sure that as I share with my students and as I go out on my own adventures and endeavors, that we do remember to take a critical look at what we're doing, and we don't just use technology for technology's sake, but when we're designing learning experiences, we do want to consider what our learning goals, our learning objectives, our learning outcomes, what those are, and use the technology appropriately and have those conversations about technology related to digital literacy and online identity and who's controlling access and all kinds of stuff like that. And then community cultural wealth, making sure that we're supporting our learners where they're at culturally speaking, and how to address what our students bring with them. I think I'm back. Hello, hello. I got kicked out. That was a very disconcerting experience. And now I got to go find my slides. I was on a roll too, I think. All right, so I'm gonna go back into screen share. Hopefully you're still seeing me okay. Hopefully all is back on track. All right, so we were at learning theory mashup. And I call this also my educator lens. And we just have finished with kind of stream of consciousness about critical media and community cultural wealth. And the newest one that I've added to my learning theory mashup is connectivism. This isn't terribly new. It's been around since 2011, so a few years, at least since 2011. And it is the learning theory for the digital age, again, taking into consideration, in my mind, the fact that we have the internet and the world of information at our hands. And it notes that this is the thesis that knowledge is distributed across a network of connections, and therefore that learning consists of the ability to construct and transverse those networks. So if you think about networks, you can really think about the internet, you can really think about how there's all these nodes and these networks that we can connect across, and people and places and pages and all kinds of different types of information and learning objects and multimedia and all of these different things that we can connect to. And it says that it shares with some other theories a core proposition that knowledge is not acquired as though it were a thing. Knowledge is, on this theory, literally the set of connections formed by actions and experiences. And so again, I really feel like connectivism really takes into consideration technology, the internet, things like artificial intelligence that isn't really taken into consideration in my mind with other learning theories. And so I really like the idea of connectivism, like pedagogy, supporting us in not getting rid of anything old, but just bringing that with us and also moving forward into the world that we now live in related to technology and the internet. And so I do want to take a moment and just kind of shift perspectives for a moment and just share my personal researcher lens. And I just do this for my students because I always want to remind my students that are doc students especially, that as educational researchers, one of the things that can happen is that we mix our lenses. We mix our educator lens with our researcher lens. And I just want to remind my students that, for example, when I did my dissertation, my lens was interpretivist, constructivist, but I didn't really understand that that's what I was doing. And so I used the term constructivism as related to the learning theory constructivism. So social constructivism and the way that we teach and learn with constructivism, that was stuck in my head. And so I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I'm a constructivist, so that is my researcher lens, is constructivism. Just looking back now, I can say no, my educational lens was constructivism, and yes, indeed, my researcher lens, luckily, was constructivism as well, but it could have been something different. And I didn't understand the difference between the researcher lens and the educator lens. And now I'm kind of starting to understand that. And also currently, I think that I actually tend towards pragmatism. And this is kind of, for me, I see this as looking at research and choosing research based on the problem at hand or the project at hand or the audience at hand and what needs to happen. And so as a pragmatist, I'm pretty practical in my course design, in my teaching and learning, and I think that it shows as well in my research. So I tend to be pretty simplistic. I tend to look at my learning design and do some action research and do what's called for at the time. And so I do think that I tend to pragmatism. So just as those of you out there who are doing both education and research, if you're an educational researcher, it might be helpful to make sure that you know which lens you're wearing at which time. And you might want to take a note to yourself and maybe tweet what your researcher lens might be. And I do believe that I provided there a link to a really nice article that you can look into. It does a good job, I think, of kind of summarizing things. It's not comprehensive in any way. There's lots more that you could read about it, but it's been the one that's been most helpful to me in figuring out what this whole paradigms, methods, and methodology things. So yes, and thank you for the comments. Really nice. Nice to see. So as a learning designer, instructional designer, I also have my own standards and learning content that I have to know in order to create learning experiences and learning opportunities. And so for me, I have engaged in a lot of research and activities and learning about standards. And for me, it's been a lot about technology and a lot about online teaching and learning. So online teaching and learning is kind of my passion. It's not kind of, it is my passion. And I'm really involved in this world a lot. And so I really appreciate the Quality Matters program and their rubric. And actually, I think they have a set of rubrics now. I've been a part of INACOL when I was doing K-12 education and teaching K-12 educators about teaching online. ISTE for technology standards, for all areas of education. They have technology standards for administrators, for technology coordinators, for teachers, for kids. Lots of great stuff with ISTE and technology. I also interact with the Online Learning Consortium. I teach some of their courses and workshops, and I've learned a lot from that group. And they actually have program standards as well as general guidelines for online course development. So they're a really good group to interact with. And of course, New Mexico State University, my home, has its own online teaching and learning program as well as educational learning and technology program. And so I engage and learn a lot there. And I have to note that California State University has a great rubric called the Chico rubric that has is really useful if you are looking for some kind of standards or evaluation tool. So when you think about then your kind of area, you might have an additional area. So you might have an additional content area. For example, maybe you are someone who teaches chemistry, and you have chemistry standards that you have to include in addition to knowing about online learning design or technology and pedagogy. And in addition to some of this other stuff, you might have a content area that has standards that you have to take care of. Or if you're a K-12 teacher, you might have K-12 standards that you have to be aware of as well. I tend to pretty much stay in the realm of teaching and learning in online and blended environments and classroom technology integration. So I'm kind of lucky I get to hang out in these standards all the time. I don't have to deal with other kinds of content standards too often. However, I'm getting ready to do some Discover STEM stuff. So, you know, I might actually have to go look at some STEM standards. But anyway, I digress. If you have your own standards and ways of looking at things, make sure to note that to yourself, tweet about it, whatever works for you. But hopefully you are, as I'm going along, you are also thinking about your own identity as a learning designer. So for me, again, another content area, so maybe yours is math or chemistry or languages or special education, whatever your area is, you want to make sure you're an expert in that area. One of our areas is learning designers in online and blended environments, and for myself is technology. And so technology is, in my mind, a really fun and awesome field, but it's ever changing. And to keep up with it, there are a couple of places that I like to go to and that I'll share with you. And I shared some of this like 2 weeks ago, I think, but I'm just going to remind you and then add some stuff. So one of the places that I really like is the Horizon reports, and I've provided a resource here for you to go check out. I actually use the Horizon report for higher education, and that just came out recently. The K-12 one just came out, museums came out, all kinds of great stuff here. And even if you're not in higher education, it's a pretty cool thing to go take a look at what are considered the trends, the challenges, and some of the ideas and developments, ideas for solutions possibly, all the kind of newest research related to technology. And for example, they talk about, that's where I got the phrase, students as creators versus students as consumers. It's a role change that we're starting to see, a learner change, and we're starting to see the educator change from guide on the side to facilitator, and those different roles of teachers and learners flip-flopping, switching, changing over time, especially with the development of technology. So some really cool stuff in the Horizon report talking about, for example, online, blended, and collaborative environments. MOOCs is probably mentioned in there. All kinds of great stuff. And again, challenges are addressed as well. For example, issues with educators not having the time or inclination to stay on top of these trends, and how that can actually, how that's creating some difficulties in higher education. And then a really nice list is in that Horizon report of the tracked technologies that I really love, because it's pretty comprehensive and just reminds me of how many things are going on right now. And each year this list just grows and the concepts grow, and you can go in there and you can say, oh, you know, there's about a handful of things in here that I know quite a bit about, and then there is a lot of stuff in here that, as much as I live in this world, I just know nothing about. So I love, you know, the apps. I'm very interested in this concept of quantified self, tablet computing, telepresence. Like right now, we're actually working in a telepresence kind of environment. And wearable technologies is something I'm always interested in. Combining the quantified self and the wearable technology is of great interest to me, especially with the new iWatch that came out. I haven't decided if I'm going to buy it yet, but I think it's an intriguing concept. Google Glass for a long time was very prominent in and popular as an idea. It seems to have worn down a little bit, but it's definitely still a viable concept and part of the wearable technology and quantified self concepts. If you look at the digital strategies, the bring your own device, the flipped classroom, games and gamification, location intelligence, maker spaces, preservation and conservation technologies, all kinds of awesome things that we can be doing in our classrooms, the internet technologies that make it all happen, the learning technologies that make it all happen, looking at badges in these MOOCs. You probably are coming across badges in some of them. In fact, I have someone who wants to share with us what she's been doing with badges. Hopefully I can connect with her again and bring her in next week. And there's the massive open online courses. That's what we're doing now. All kinds of stuff, digital identity, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. I have no clue what tacit intelligence is, but social networks are pretty big, 3D printing. So you could go through this list and find, you know, the things that speak to you, and then the things that you're like, what is that? I want to know more. Or what is that? Maybe I don't care right now. But like I said, this is a big list, and it can be, in my mind, somewhat overwhelming. And you just kind of have to remember that you do want to keep that critical media mindset so that you aren't taking on too much for yourself and your own learners. That you are, my learners will tell you that sometimes I overwhelm them with technology, and so I have to myself sometimes back off and be critical and say, you know what, even with this MOOC, you know, what is the return on investment for this, for myself and for my students? And I'll have to definitely take a deep look at that and say, well, is this something that I should do again? And I'll get advice from my students, and I'll think about it for myself. And, you know, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I will have learned a lot this time, and we will definitely have been transformed from this, but sometimes less is more. You never know. Yes, big data, very powerful. I agree. And I think sometimes that's where we as educators need to be a bit more pragmatic sometimes, because as a researcher, I need to think about where does the big data and the quantitative data fit in what I'm doing, and where is my ethical responsibility in this to make sure that I take a look at that and analyze on both sides of that coin, and then where do I take it qualitatively. So I think we're just going to see more and more, more and more of this, and very excited and also a little intimidated, but I try and stay on track of it. And so, like I said, some places to stay on track are the Horizon report, but also there's a great resource called the Top 100 Tools for Learning. And actually the newest report list came out just recently, and it's kind of interesting. You've already seen a little tip there, and you've already seen the slide before, but maybe you haven't. Maybe you're joining us newly. But a couple of weeks ago I did share this, and just a reminder that I also share my own list of tools that I keep and you're welcome to use. And so the #1 tool for 5 years in a row, I'm not going to make you guess, but it is I should go back and change that because the new report came out. And then the other ones are Google Drive, Google Search, PowerPoint, YouTube. Those were, let's see what the new ones are. Twitter, Google Drive, YouTube, PowerPoint, and Google Search, still the top 5. So I don't have to change that list at all. Also, numbers 38 and 78 are from what I like to call the MOOC pack, right? Because we are in a massive open online course, MOLO concept. And in the MOOC pack, Coursera and Canvas. Coursera is number 38 and Canvas is number 78, our very own learning environment for our MOLO. So these are just the places that I like to go to stay on top of my field, the technology field. Those of you in learning design and technology, these are great resources. That's not quite what I wanted. Oh, so hopefully you're seeing me again. I think I've joined myself for something, and we're thinking that Chrome is not having a good day, because I know that I did have some weird issues earlier today, and one of my students said that they were having some weird issues as well. So who knows? Let's see if I can find myself again. And I'm going to have to open up my window. Hold on. I'm going to have to find my PowerPoint again, because everything just shut down. You know, it's just one of those days. Maybe we need to take a moment and have a reflection about technology, Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. We got to be prepared for that. All right, well, at a minimum, you always have my slides to go back to, and you're welcome to use them however you need, but we'll keep at it. And we had just finished number 38 and number 78 on the top 100 tools for learning list, and those are from the MOOC pack. And I was getting ready to move to this very interesting slide. And it's actually not, I didn't make this. This is from the Horizon Report 2014. And the funny thing is that it was there like on a second or third page. Beautiful, beautiful, really cool model that just spoke to me. But there was like a sentence of explanation for it in the Horizon Report. And I actually went to the New Media Consortium, who puts out the Horizon Report. I went to their summer conference and I asked about it. And I think they're still thinking about it and working on it. There's a group in Europe that's working on it. And I think more is going to come out related to it. But I just thought this was one of those really cool things that I'd like to actually go and have turned into a big poster that I laminate and put on my wall. And the thing that I really like about that is I feel like it compresses a lot of information, kind of a checklist of things that you want to take a look at and remind yourself about as you're creating learning environments and learning opportunities and activities. So if you take a look at it, it's a wealth of concepts and information and ideas that you want to think about when you're designing. And in the center you see it says innovative pedagogical practices, and it provides what is believed at this time from the kind of most advanced perspective in my mind in each of these I think it's 8 areas of content and curricula, assessment, learning practices, teaching practices, organization, leadership and values, connectedness, and infrastructure. And then if you go through and look kind of like at the sub concepts, you'll just see that it then digs in deeper to these areas that we should all just be paying attention to. Emotional attention, cross and transdisciplinary content and curricula, open educational resources. And that's why I'm personally exploring MOOCs, because I really believe in the open education movement and providing resources globally and to all learners and to educators, and to stop making teachers feel like they're being dropped to the bottom of the barrel every time and having to create everything from scratch. Yes, we all should be learning designers and creating stuff, but there's so much that you can share and draw upon that already exists. And that's why I think the open educational resources and movement is so hugely important, because it just gives us an extra leg to stand on. Not that we need a third leg, but you get my idea, my point, right? It's just, it really helps us not have to start from the bottom over and over and over again. And meaningful activities for content and curricula, and then looking at assessment, where you want engaging assessment formats, formative assessment, recognition of informal and non-formal learning. And then you look at learning practices, learning by exploring, creating, playing, self-regulated learning, personalized learning, peer-to-peer collaboration, teaching practices of soft skills, individual strengths, multiple learning styles, multiple modes of thinking, organization where you're monitoring quality, innovative timetables, innovative services, leadership and values with innovation management, social entrepreneurship, social inclusion and equity, connectedness of networking with the real world, social networks, learning events, and then infrastructure, where you look at both the ICT, the online, the technology and infrastructure, and then you also look at your physical spaces. A lot's being done and looked at related to the physical space and where we hang out with each other, and what those physical spaces can look like, as opposed to sometimes what they do look like, tables and chairs and rows and students working in isolation and things like that. So this is just one of those things that I find to be really helpful from the learning design perspective, to just have as that reminder of, am I kind of covering some of the things that are relevant to what I'm doing and teaching and providing. Take a drink of water. And so kind of brings us then to a little bit of the formal side of things when we talk about instructional design. And so for those of you who did purchase the ISD book, that book is very specific to the instructional design perspective, and specifically the concept of the prescriptive model of instructional design known as ADDIE. And one of the things that I found in my own analysis of my the programs and courses that I was involved with is that I found that my students didn't have the language or much of the language that they needed to be learning designers. And some of them were really wanting to go out into the world and be a part of groups that create learning environments and online courses and blended learning. And so kind of to go out there professionally and be a part of those groups and teams and companies, you really do need to have this formal knowledge, some of the vocabulary and some of these models. You should have a few of those under your belt just so that you can speak the language and that you show that you know what you're doing. And then of course a caution in there that these design perspectives and these design models that we go and look at, if you're coming from a critical pedagogue perspective or a perspective of just having care with some of these models, that you don't get too rigid and that you remember that flexibility is really helpful. But again, just having that vocabulary can be really helpful. So for Addie, if you wanted to be knowledgeable, you would know that Addie is analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. It shouldn't be that difficult to ponder Addie and think about Addie and use it in your thoughts and design process. And you can get very complicated with it, but you can also get very simple with it. For example, I went on that paragliding foray a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that I wanted to do that video and just haven't had time, but I plan to still do it at some point, is create kind of an analogy with that adventure. And so I had to do some analysis before I went paragliding, right? I had to go and find out who was providing paragliding in New Mexico, what were the needs for someone who's going to go paragliding, did my family want to go with me, has anyone ever done it before, what were my thoughts and fears about it, and some preparation, right? So I had to do some personal research and analysis based on that particular adventure. And I was basically kind of creating an experience for myself and my family. And then when you look at the design, you know, I had to schedule it. The people who take us paragliding had to design that particular endeavor. They have a lot that they have to go through to make that happen. And then of course, developing everything. And so then, you know, as I think about it, it may not be the best analogy, but anyway, you have to develop the experience and then you have to implement it. So then we actually jumped off the cliff and sailed in the air, and it was an awesome experience. And then when you're done, you evaluate it and you think, well, was that worth it? Should I do it again? What were my thoughts about that? What was I afraid for nothing? And you know, we had some great conversations on the way home after having done that, and we kind of evaluated that experience. So there was some reflection involved. Could have done all kinds. I could have sent them a survey and said, hey, do you guys want to do this again? Or should we do something else? Should we reanalyze and develop a new experience? So that's a very simplistic way of looking at Addie, but you can also then apply that to your teaching and learning process and to your learning design process. And so you would think about analysis. So when I designed this particular activity, the analysis that went into that was, like I said, I was finding anecdotally that my students didn't really have the instructional design language, and so I wanted to provide that for them. And so I went into design mode and created a flow of activities and designed what that would look like. And then kind of from what we call a chunking perspective, where you come up with, you know, the key learning objectives or learning outcomes that you would want your students to have. And then based on those learning objectives, you develop the actual learning activities, the modules, the assessments, and you want your, of course, your learning objectives aligned with your activities and aligned with your assessment. And then you implement the whole thing. And then you evaluate and see, did the student learning outcomes, were they actually met? Did they pass any tests that you gave them? Did they create whatever content you wanted them to create? What happened? And then based on that evaluation, you can go back into that process again, and you can go back into redesign, redevelop, and re-implement. And we call it an iterative process. So it could be circular, it could be spirally, it could be a variety of ways where you look at how you design your course. But that's more the kind of linear, could be circular, analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And so then there's this list that I thought was really helpful if you want to be really more informed about what this whole instructional design thing looks like from the 300-mile perspective. You can see the modern models of behaviorism, cognitivism. You can look at the prescriptive design models, of which ADDIE is one. You can see I've clicked into all the ADDIE models because that's the one that I focus on as a foundation. You can look at the Dick and Carey model, the Robert Gagne model, instructional systems design, and actually ADDIE pretty much fits into the instructional systems design. The 4CID model, David Merrill, rapid prototyping, objective taxonomies. So knowing the taxonomies, for example, Bloom's taxonomy or digital Bloom's, which isn't listed here, helps you create those learning outcomes and those activities that are part of that learning design process. And then there's a whole set of postmodern phenomenological models. Get really in deep with that. There's a couple on here that there's a couple that I haven't seen in this list that I've seen on people emailing me, the Agile model, the SAM model. So you can see that this whole concept of instructional design can get very big, and it really is up to you to decide how deep you want to get. Minimally, if I were you, I would definitely have an understanding of ADDIE so that you have the basic vocabulary, and then pick a few others to go take a look at. And then remember that I would add pedagogy into all of this and connectivism as part of your instructional design toolkit. And that said, I'm going to get a little practical on you. So as a learning designer, to be honest, sometimes I don't go into ADDIE mode. Sometimes I use a process called backwards design. And this is a very practical perspective. And for me, it's making sure that I know my content area. I have a set of standards that I keep a checklist basically right there. And so I don't know if you've seen the Quality Matters rubric, but it's a really helpful resource that if you go to the qualitymatters.org site to their rubric section, it's actually available for download right now, the newest version. They're not going to give you the annotations or the really spread out version that provides all of the examples and stuff, but this is a really nice little checklist that as you're designing online or blended learning environments, it keeps you honest. It makes sure that you're providing great navigation for your students, that you have done your job related to creating your learning objectives, aligning those with your instruction and your assessment, that you've attempted some interactivity, that your technology is aligned, that you've provided enough learner support, that you've addressed accessibility and usability as much as is possible, and as much as you and your institution are dealing with that. A lot of that is institutional, but it's a really great checklist that I like to keep on hand at all times. It just helps me, like I said, helps me stay honest. And then I tend to, like I said, I'm a backwards design kind of person, and so I'm going to take you to a little graph of that. I tend to think about what is it that I really need my learners to get. I go do research about a topic that I'm going to teach on, and then I think, what is it that I really want my learners to get out of this? And based on that, then I come up with what is the acceptable evidence that they're going to show me by having gone through all of this process. And then you plan the learning experiences and instruction accordingly. And so I can give you like the most current example that I have of this, and I've got to go find my drive again. I had it all loaded earlier. Let's hope the system doesn't kick me out yet one more time. But when I was designing this MOOC, I pretty much use a backwards design plan. So I don't know if you know this or have encountered this yet, but in your Google Docs, you have the capacity to see, if it's your Google Doc, you can see what's called the revision history. And so I can actually take you back in time with this document all the way to April 9th, the day that I started designing this MOOC. And you can see that I had 3 overarching learning outcomes that I started out with. That learners would be able to identify, share, and discuss technology trends and their influence on learning theory and learning design, kind of what we're doing today. That you would be able to identify and discuss innovative course and classroom models with an emphasis on learner-instructor collaborative design, democratic classrooms, collaboration, online blended learning environments, high-flex, multiplayer, etc. And through reflection, interaction, and discussion, learners will apply new knowledge from the MOOC to their own learning design of courses and classroom. So this was my first initial set of things that I thought, this is what I'd like to have MOOC participants do. And then I started to break it out. And I put my ideas for what's going to go on the home page, and that usually has an introduction video. It will also have my course orientation video, the getting started instructions, and then I broke out very basically what the 3 modules that I thought I would do in this were going to look like. Now, over time, that expanded to 5 modules, as you all know, because you're in here, and those are actually called adventures at this point. And I don't know when that actually started to happen, but at some point I started to expand out that I needed a getting started module, and then I needed an ending module. And so at some point, there it is, there's the preparing for the adventure. Then I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to want them to collaborate. But in order to collaborate, I've got to set them up for collaboration. So that's adventure 2 then, joining your guilds, gathering your tools. And I decided I was going to play with gamification. And so that was all just mapped out at first. And then I was going to have you choose your quests for the innovative learning design part, and then come back at the end and reflect. And so over time, I just kept coming back and building the resources and the concepts. And then until it got to the point where they were built up enough that I could go into my learning management system and start creating the resources and the instructions and the discussions and all of those things that would be needed to create all of these activities. So that's just kind of my way of doing things. You have to think about what works for you, and you want to look at that ADDIE process. You want to think about your own philosophies and your own perspectives and what's going to work for you. But I tend to use the Google Doc a lot. I tend to start throwing my ideas and all the resources. So if you look at the bottom of this page, you're going to see that I have all of these resources. There's my problems with MOOCs, the pedagogy, when I was looking at what people have to say related to collaboration, then thinking about what kind of research I might do based on all of this. And I would keep notes on my progress, because I actually had to go through the course proposal with Canvas Learning Network. I had to get an MOU signed. I had all kinds of stuff that I had to do just to get started on this. And then, of course, I was so excited about it, and I was continuously adding all of these resources and ideas. And but it's a little bit, I tend to be a little bit more haphazard, and maybe not quite as linear as maybe the ADDIE model would sort of lead you to believe maybe we should be. So some of you might really align with the ADDIE model because it can keep you on track, and some of you might be a little too, I like to think of the, what is that professor whose hair is sticking out all over the place? The absent-minded professor. There are some of us out here who are just all over the place, and we want you to do everything. And so I'm like, okay, well, in order to get you to do everything, then I'm going to put it all down, and we're going to go step by step, and we're going to do everything. And yeah, that can be a little crazy, but it is the way that some people approach learning design, and it sort of is kind of my way, where I really think, what is it that I want them to do by the end, and I make that list, and then okay, then I work backwards, and what do I have to do to scaffold them into that end product. And so everything that I can do to scaffold the learners into that end product is then the instructions, my instructions for all of the activities. So I hope that makes sense. You have to think about where you are as an instructional designer and a learning designer, and move forward. So for Adventure 3, I've got to go back and open up our course, our MOLO. And remind ourselves for Adventure 3, it's a little simpler than before, some of the other adventures. And so to get us through it, I thought it might be nice to have a conversation about these concepts of ADDIE, SAM, Agile, backwards design, universal design, taking a look at all of these concepts and answering for ourselves some of these questions. You might think about what is instructional design, learning design, and curriculum. And is there a difference between these concepts? And what do you think about ADDIE and other models of instructional learning design that you use or know about? What learning theories, approaches, strategies, and methods do you use or appeal to you? Kind of what I did today, but for yourselves. And then you could, to practice, you could think about this course and create a description in the terms of ADDIE for what you see in this course. You can ask me questions about it. I've given you a lot of information about it, about my thoughts in creating this course. Really up to you to figure out how you want to practice the language. And then one of the activities that I did last year with my students that turned out really awesome was ask them the question, what does a learning designer, aka instructional designer, do? And with that, I had students create animations, comic strips, all kinds of fun stuff. And so I give you the opportunity to ponder that question and create an answer using a multimedia tool. And then we do have some guild opportunities in our last adventure together. And so if you want to work collaboratively, again, I provide you that opportunity and the Google Doc to get that set up. I'd like us to get that set up this week so that next week all you have to worry about is actually doing the group work. And of course you have the opportunity for reflection. I left out the quad quest this week because I just felt that we have plenty to do. All right, so I'm going to take a moment and find our chat again, because when I got kicked out, I lost my chat, I lost my Twitter, and I got kind of discombobulated. Yes, the guild agreement. That's awesome. Yep. Constructivism from constructivists. Yeah, I hear you. Love it. So I'm really appreciating your comments. Just keeping an eye out in case there are any questions. Yeah, the video lags. So when we talk about participation points, Pearl, I was talking about, it's just kind of, I make up words all the time. I don't know if you guys have realized this about me, but I make up my own words, so, or concepts or terms. So I created MOLO for our interaction in this technically MOOC, technically online course. I'm calling it a MOLO. And then I'm calling our places of interaction that we could find ourselves in or choose to be a part in, I'm calling those participation points. So the hashtag LDTI MOLO in Twitter, where people are posting Twitter comments as we are in this process of hanging out, this chat where people are providing maybe questions or commenting to each other, maybe a little back channel going on. Also the actual page where the broadcast occurs, people can actually post comments there. People can also post questions and answers to me live in the broadcast by using the Q&A tool. So each of those, I call them points because it's a place, right? It's a place where you can participate. So I've been calling them participation points because I couldn't really kind of think of another word for it. So I came up with participation points for engagement. And so Toto, you say, do you suggest many participation points to increase engagement? You know, I don't necessarily suggest many. I'm just, in coming into trying to do this MOOC type of situation, I took into consideration the potential of, like, I had 600 people enroll. And when you're dealing with many people from around the world, I don't really know how all of those people like to engage and interact and participate. So I was providing multiple points of participation so that people from around the world could choose their favorite point of participation. I also have a Facebook section for this, but I haven't seen much in Facebook. But if I saw people interacting in the Facebook participation area, I would note that as well. So, you know, in different way of thinking and commenting and interacting, and they might want to choose across those opportunities. Now, the problem with that is that I think that we find ourselves, many of us, still in a place where we're maybe not used to multitasking, or we're not used to having so many options, and it can actually be overwhelming and confusing. So it's not that I suggest many participation points. I think you have to think about the learning activity, the learning environment, the learning objectives that you are personally working with. And I'm actually, you know, I'm working in this area of emerging technologies and emerging learning design and MOOC creation, and so I'm very experimental. And for myself and for a few people that interact with me, this many participation points could be could increase engagement and could be very relevant and useful. But for a majority of folks, I think it's probably overwhelming, and I'm kind of finding out, like I said, I overbuilt this course a bit because I was concerned about the potential of hundreds of people. You know, if that were to happen, how would I deal with that? And in a learning management system like Canvas, if you look at discussion threads and you look at this chat, if you had 600 people participating in those threads and in this chat, that would look pretty crazy. And so a better way to maybe like have that kind of interaction on a very broad scale would be to include the social media, include all of these other places, and let people choose where they're at. So I would say if you are looking to create your own online course or your own blended learning opportunity, you probably want to pick one participation point per activity, or pick a toolkit. For example, when I do collaboration activities with my students and have them do that, I pick two tools for them. I pick Google Docs and Skype, and I recommend that they use those two participation points, as we're calling them right now, those two collaboration tools to get the job done. For another activity, we might just use the discussion forum as our participation point. So it really depends on what you're doing and what you're designing for and what your learning objectives are. I don't necessarily suggest many participation points to increase engagement. I do suggest thinking outside the box sometimes, and if an activity supports it, maybe adding something like Twitter to your toolkit for your students to include a different type of participation point for a particular activity or for a particular type of teaching and learning process that you have going in your class. So for example, in my classes, I always talk about personal learning network development, and for several years now, I've been using the Twitter Top 5 that many of you have encountered as a key activity in all of those classes. And so that Twitter Top 5 activity, in alignment with the Personal Learning Network, that Twitter is a key participation point and a key tool in developing personal learning networks, professional development, and it kind of takes us outside of the online course, but it gives us something specific that I have a specific learning goal and a specific learning objective tied to it, and it takes us outside the box a bit. So I think that you just have to think about your learning design and your learners. I cannot edit my guild agreement. I want to create a new one, but I do not want to confuse guild members. So Toto, I think that's something you're going to want to work with me through the inbox, because you do not need, if you're wanting to move for Adventure 4, you do not need another guild agreement. You want to move right into the activities in Adventure 4. So I don't know if you're talking about past activities or present activities. So maybe send me an inbox message. And Toto says, I mean QA handout, Twitter, moderator series, and the Canvas chat. Yes, so those were the participation points. The Q&A in the Hangout, the Twitter, LTTI, Molo, the moderator series, which I took out of this one, and the Canvas chat. And so again, I think that you want to fine tune your participation points for your learners, for your environment, for your content. Yeah, we love so many things, but we can't be an expert in everything. Love it. Yeah, I'm pretty confused too. Yep, and I've been known to be very overwhelming. Yep, you want to be as concise as possible when you're at that point. Okay, great. Accessible participation mediums, I like that. Got it. Okay. Loving the chat going on. All right, so it's a really good time for me to pause and find out if you have any questions. And I know I need to wait for a few minutes because some of you might be watching the broadcast and not quite live with us. So there might be lag, there might be some things going on. And so I just want to make sure that those of you who have made it through all of this and still with me, if you have any questions, that we talk about those. Because what I can do is I can bring up a new Google Doc to try and deal with that. How do I create a new document? So you have a couple of ways of creating a new Google document. You can just create one like I just did in your Google Drive. But if you're doing this with a group and you have an existing group, remember that you can go to people, and I don't open this up because I'm trying not to show too many names. If you're in the chat, your name might get shown. But if you go to people and then you find your group, you go into your group there and you have the collaboration option. And when you choose the collaboration option, you can create a group document for that group and invite the people in that group to that document. So that's another way that you can create a group document. If you're looking to create a document for and create a group for Adventure 4 for next week, we don't have those groups set up yet. You got to set those up this week. So if you're looking backwards at Adventure 3, then you still have those existing groups that you can go to people, find your group, and create a collaboration document through that process. And it's on the left side menu in collaborations. If you need further help with that, like I said, inbox me. All right, hopefully, if you have any further questions at any point in time, remember that you have the FAQs and help forum that you can post your question to. There's not so many people in here that I can't handle the inbox. The inbox is perfectly valid way to communicate your questions with me, and I'll answer them whichever direction that they come. You can also send me a Twitter question, I'm very, very responsive on Twitter because it goes directly to my phone when you direct message me or send an @DesertJewel tweet to me. You can email me, whatever works for you. Some of my students know that you can email, tweet, call, whatever works. If you're around the world, you probably don't want to call me because you don't have my number, but my students know that they can call me if needed. All right, so I think perhaps we're at a good stopping point. And thanks for hanging out. I'll keep an eye out for your questions.